You set the stage perfectly. And last night I was watching the Apocalypse Now redo, the director's cut of Francis Ford Coppola's masterpiece. And of course, the song by Jim Morrison came along, "This is the End, My Friend." I could have started with that actually, this is the end, my friends. We have nothing to look forward to when it comes to climate change in cities. And while we hear about Ophelia hitting the British Isles right now. But of course, there's always light in the tunnel, and the end can't be reversed. So I'll try to go through a number of things, what we call global urbanism today. And Slavoj Žižek, who's considered sometimes as a crazy lunatic or a genius, a neo-Marxist philosopher, has said that we really don't even have the right questions. We're not even asking the right questions in society right now. And not even that, maybe we don't even have the apprehensions of the magnitude of the problems we're confronted with. And we are really now in sort of a whirlpool of converging crises when it comes to global climate change. And where is that going to happen? It's going to happen in the cities. Yeah, well, technology. Some of these are, nothing is happening, but okay, maybe I should press back or next. It's okay. We are used to this. This is always the beginnings we have. We end on a good note, but oh, there we go. Something has come up, but I'm not sure. Now you're going to see the whole thing fast forward. But of course, global trends of urbanizations. We hear this, and of course, people are a little bit annoyed when we bring up the numbers. Yes, we're going to get urbanized by 2025. 9 billion of us are going to live in cities. Again, the common denominator is cities. So the battle for this planet, battle for urbanizations, battle for urbanism is going to be either won or lost in cities. Because cities are, as you pointed rightly, as Edward Glaser has written, the finest sort of condensers of innovation, talent, technology, and tolerance, as Richard Florida has phrased it. But they're also the worst ecological disasters we have. So those two need to be sort of balanced. And what is the way forward? There's some global mega trends outside, global mega trends out there, and there's never a consensus about what they are. But there are some major ones that you will find consensus from the World Economic Forum to Forbes to leading institutes of technology. And what we're seeing now, of course, we're seeing a massive shift in demographics and social change. We're seeing a massive rise in the aging society, which will have to be replaced in a way by a completely new strata of society. And how do we take care of our aging? We see shifts in global economic power. We see it on every day if you just watch the social media or TV. And that is going to have consequences also for sort of the reassessing of urbanization. Rapid urbanization, or as some call it, rapid urban growth, is an unstoppable thing. While we have a decline in some European cities and countries of our population, in other places like Asia and Africa, we have an explosion of population. And it's sometimes it's sort of politically incorrect or difficult to talk about that. How do we reverse that trend, or how do we keep it under control? But it's something we need to think about, because mostly rapid urbanization happens in the cities. Everybody moves to the cities. Climate change, I think there is a consensus. Maybe not with some leading presidents of in the global sphere today, maybe a very few of them, but there is a consensus among researchers that climate change, and that we are one of the causes of global climate change. And that resource scarcity, especially when it comes to water and when it comes to food, is going to be one of the big challenges that are going to confront us. This was raised by John Bennington, who was a special advisor to the UK government on climate change. So there's so many trends out there happening. There's different divergent approaches to urbanism or urbanizations. We have the rise and explosion of global cities. We have traffic congestion continuing, even though we put a lot of effort. We come with technological breakthroughs when it comes to traffic planning, with new modes of transportation, a lot of focus on public transportation. We still cannot get rid of the automobile. Automobile is still there, is going to be with us for quite a long time. My colleague Peter Drudge at the University of Luxembourg has said if you take away the fossil fuel dependency now, our civilization will probably collapse in 2 to 3 weeks. So the gradual sort of disappearance of fossil fuels and replacement by renewables is going to take a much longer time. And sometimes I think we're a little bit too optimistic. Suburban sprawl or urban sprawl communities are continuing to grow as we speak. It's also connected to the lifestyles, but it's also connected to the way patterns we build our cities. And finally, the global climate change. Another person that is connected to our center, and he actually sits on our strategic board, but it's very much close to Edward Glaser, it's Richard Florida, one of the maybe leading urban thinkers of today. Now, recently they're saying Richard was wrong. Richard is sort of coming back to his roots and he's saying sorry because 15, 20 years ago he came up with this incredible idea, or sort of he came up with the concept of the creative class, looking at the cities where technology, talent, and tolerance were actually happening. And he built the whole thesis and paradigm around it. 15, 20 years after that, he's coming with something which he calls the urban crisis. Whatever he has predicted, maybe it has happened, but there's a darker side to it. And exactly what we heard in the interview, in the introduction, there is a darker and a brighter side of the cities. So they both exist. I would say we have the creative class, but we also have the urban crisis, for whom cities have been successful places for a specific segment of people, but for some they have been left completely on the sides. So how do we bridge that divide? What we see with the center where I work, and these are not just our thoughts, they're collected thoughts about many of my colleagues working in different places like MIT or Berkeley or Georgia Tech or London School of Economics or UCL in London, all our partners. What are the major trends for cities that are happening now? There's a number of them, but I will bring some of them here. Sharing cities, circular economies, or sustainable consumption is one of the big things. And now there's sort of an adaptation to this new idea. How do we sort of retrofit our cities that we can have sharing as one of the major ideas? Often we focus on the Western society, of course, here in the Nordic scope. But I think we have this quality at KTH, and KTH, by the way, we call the MIT of the North, and I am responsible for giving that catchphrase. So here at the MIT of the North, we also look at the global South, because there you have the informal settlements. There you have a completely different pattern of development. So in order to learn something, it's an extremely important thing to learn from both ways. What are the Nordic ideas that we can transfer, and what is something from the informal settlements when it comes to organic structures, to the inner sort of kineticism of the city that we can use here. Segregation, inequality, and injustice. Of course, these are things marked with which Richard Florida brought up in the urban crisis. And these are some of the main elements of the urbanism, sort of how do we get livable and urbanism for all. That continues. Forced migrations and urban insecurity is something that we're going to live for many decades to come. And if we had a wave that is connected to disasters or man-made disasters or natural ones, when we see the forced migrations, we're probably going to see much more when it comes to climate change, that we're going to have climate refugees moving from one part to the other. And how do we accommodate for these people? It's all about human scale, walkability, and transient-oriented development. Now we have a consensus. Even if we belong to different paradigms and different philosophies and different standpoints, I think there we are more or less on the same page that this is what our cities need to have. Intergenerational, biophilic, human scale. This is what the idea is. And with that, I would say the public space has become one of the focuses, because this is one of the main building elements of urban design, main elements of urbanism. This is maybe the only true democratic open spaces we still have. And if you can see, all the demonstrations, all the revolutions always happen either in streets or in squares or in parks. So the focus on public spaces is coming back to the agenda again. And recently in Quito, last year on the global conference on human settlements, public spaces have finally received the focus and the attention they deserve. Sustainability, resilience, and new technologies are great. It's important, but without changing lifestyles and patterns of our everyday travels, this is going to be very difficult. Because as my colleague Jim Howard, counselor, says, energy, you cannot replace energy by technology, and you cannot replace many things by technology. It can be a good source and a good thing to have. And finally, the new unions between urban real estate, public sector partnerships, and innovation districts. When we look from academia, sometimes we are sort of looking in a drier way. Can we conceptualize what we see happening out there in terms of trends? What happens in terms of trends? What do we see if we look at urbanism? That's basically the economic, social, political, cultural, spatial forces that shape our cities and the influence they have on the built environment. What happens in terms of paradigms within our disciplines of urban planning, urban design, landscape architecture, and architecture? So me and my colleague Chris Jolson, we sort of posed these 5 based on some good ideas from our other colleagues, that we see 5 different strands of happening, everything from traditional way how we build cities to sort of generic hybridity when we talk about great architecture projects that sort of create contextual spaces and try to put focus on within cities on extraordinary projects. Re-urbanism, sort of this constant urbanity where we try to revitalize, repatch, and rework the cities in a way that is suitable for all the styles that are there. And finally, the green urbanism approaches, which are all plethora from very bottom up to top down, everything from ecological urbanism to biophilic cities to sort of pop-up approaches when it comes to everyday urbanism. Our colleague Matthew Carmona, who's on our academic board, has been working with public spaces for many, many years. And when we talk about placemaking, one of those catchwords, catchphrases we hear today, for him, he doesn't really think that all of these paradigms are that much important, but he thinks from all of these different approaches, how we build cities and how we design, retrofit, and plan, we should maybe take out the best things from all of them. And in that way, maybe get real placemaking in place. So there's these different trends that we see. Everything from bottom-up approaches. Placemaking is even that picture where you see a person sleeping in a box outside of Facebook or Twitter headquarters in San Francisco. So it's for those that have and those that have not. Placemaking for some and placemaking for not for some. The whole issue of equity, justice, and sustainability comes into question here. And go back to the questions of public spaces, for whom and for what. Sometimes, as David Harvey said, there will be winners and losers in that game. Public space should be for everybody, but at the end, not everybody's going to be a winner in that game. So, of course, we love public spaces. Sometimes we don't even know that we are so much connected and embedded in these areas. They can either be squares or streets or parks. Within the whole convergence of crises and our discussions about resilience, sustainability, and global climate change, we have become obsessed by nature very much. And sometimes I feel we become obsessed in almost a paranoid, darker way, saying that nature is going to be the only element that's going to repair our cities. And then we talk about biophilic cities, we talk about ecological urbanism, we talk about all kinds of different approaches. But if we were a little bit going back to history and looking at Frederick Law Olmsted, one of the greatest designers of parks, not just in the history of the US, but in history of the world, I would say, he would probably be turning in his grave, because he understood nature and parks and the relation to the green as a conversation between urban and natural. He always didn't see it as that you are pushing green in a sort of an aggressive way in order to fix the urban, but you're actually pushing green to allow the urban to be fixed in a normal way or a natural way. Dana Cuff was here just a few weeks ago, and she's part of our great first, I would say, the only lecture series in the world that has 15 female distinguished speakers top of their game. And she also talked about public spaces. Somebody that's been working on a very interesting urban laboratory, and that is the city of Los Angeles. And by the way, in the US, there's a lot of things that happen that are transported and exported to the rest of the world. A lot of bad and good and ugly. We test them. We take the ones that are good and bad, and sometimes we reject them, and then we send them back to the US. So US is important in that way because it's an experimentation lab. As we get sort of the fast food, we get also fast urbanism through that. But I would say a combination of, we still can be very imaginative when it comes to public spaces. And this comes for the whole idea, if we have this climate change, we have this enormous urbanization that is putting pressure on our cities. On one side, there is this idea, maybe we should stop with everything. Maybe we should just go back retroactively, go back to some extreme tradition way of repacking our cities and our settlements, and do not have any imagination or any innovation. On the contrary, I think one should have both. Because I'll show you in a second a quote by Bjarke Ingels, cities are never a closed system. They're actually an open system that needs to be added, and things need to be added and taken away. So maybe what we are seeing now is something which my colleague Peter Calthorpe has framed as cultural urbanism, another one of those isms. But really something that has reflects local culture and encourages social interface. Maybe this is our task now. We do think globally. We think in a sense of transurbanism, transformation plus urbanization, modernization plus globalization. We have that nonstop in our heads, from the students to faculty, from our research to teaching. But at the end of the day, our calling as professionals within this field is going to be, we need to fix something which is important and pertinent at the local level, having in our mind the global sphere and the global trends. What can we do? So maybe the local scale, the scale where we can celebrate different cultures, different ethnicities, different discourses, different conversations, different traditions, different histories, is maybe a way forward. It's another alternative, it's another supplement. Bjarke was right. Of course, he's a star architect, and not everybody agrees with or likes his building. But the city is really never completed. And it has a beginning, but it has no end. Every new generation comes in. Our professor Alexis Pontvik here in urban design used to say when we were taking a tour with our students looking at one of the architecture buildings, and most of them said, oh, this is so terrible. He said, wait a minute, this is a child of that time. So they're children of different times. Do you discard and get rid of your children? Probably not. You don't want to send them to foster homes. So we are parents to all of these decades. And now I would say what Nathan Glazer, famous American sociologist, said once during the modernist period, and we'll hear interesting talks here about our Million program, which was built in that period. There was a strong social agenda from architects, planners, and other professions. There was a collaboration of work to try to create a better society. Right now, our superstar architects do not have that. There is no social agenda anymore. So I think we need to go back to some of the values we have had at those times. A colleague of mine, Julian Agiman, said that the famous psychologist said to him, Julian, if you put your books on the screen for 40 seconds, 25% of the audience will buy your books. If you keep them longer, maybe that percentage is going to rise. But what I've just said here in a very condensed manner, you'll be able to read in an upcoming book, which is called In the Post-Urban World, which we have produced within our center, which has 20 of the leading urban thinkers of today: Manuel Castells, Saskia Sassen, Edward Glazer, all three of our honorary doctors, Richard Florida, Fran Tonkis, and many, many others. So with that, I would welcome you to our Center for the Future of Places, where we discuss these issues. We run research projects. We are pretty young. We're, I think, in our 11th month. So we're a little baby growing. But we are extremely, I would say, we're really happy to find ourselves in this convergence of crises, because if ideas are going to be used now, are going to be needed, they're going to be needed now. And we're really glad that we have an incredible international network. And of course, as you know, that's also very much thanks to KTH's position in the global academic sphere. So thank you very much, and please go out and do whatever you can from your own little corner of your professions and disciplines and your lifestyles. Thank you.